This is Justice Worriers, a podcast where we think about things that are right and wrong in our world and how Christian ideas can help us respond to them. We prefer hard questions over easy answers, and we'd love you to join us in our ramblings. Listen in and contact us using the links in the show notes. Hello and welcome to Justice Warriors episode 15. This episode is called Heaven. My name's Andy and I'm joined by Leah. Say hi, Leah.
Hi there.
And by Jörg. Say hi, Jörg.
Hello.
And this episode is leading on from an interview with the other Andy, in which we talked about a whole load of things. But one of the things that Andy talked about was a few things about heaven that will lead us into what we think will probably be several episodes about different aspects of the future, heaven, things like that. But the thing we're going to talk about this evening is what the whole idea of heaven is, and maybe have we got it all the wrong way round. Andy made a reference to the fully caffeinated experience of the kingdom of God, so we want to try and talk about that a bit and understand what that means. So what should we start with? Should we start with our homework? Let's start with our homework. Sure. So our homework was to answer the question, you fall into a coma and wake up 100 years from now. What does the world look like? So who wants to start? Leah, are you ready to start with your answer to that question?
So, first of all, there's an awful lot more water around because we're really, let's just get the climate change thing out there. We haven't solved catastrophic climate change, and the world's population is smaller and there's less land left because the sea's risen. I can't get away from that. But the rest of my prognosis is a lot more hopeful. I feel we are in for some rocky times ahead, but hopefully within 100 years we will have learnt to be a kinder and more considerate, more peaceable race. I think we will have learnt from some of the 21st century's mistakes. And I'm not sure that'll be a very pleasant process, but I'm hopeful that we will grow and mature as a race. That's very generic, but that's what I think the world will look like.
Wow. Jörg, what about you?
I'll start the other way around. You wake up and it's really, really cool. There's all these gadgets, holograph, just kind of immersive technology. You don't even know what's real anymore. Electric cars everywhere. Lots to discover. Really, really neat. And then as time goes on, you see that humanity hasn't changed all that much. You discover where the street children are now hidden. What tech has done to mental health. How hard it is to find a nature spot. Wars are fought very differently, perhaps a bit more meanly through biological warfare or something like that. Perhaps we've even bombed part of the planet into Stone Age with nukes. So I would imagine you kind of wake up in a world that is quite livable and you think is cool, and gradually you uncover all the things that were lost in the meantime and have not changed, maybe even gotten worse, or just changed in a very different way because poverty now looks different, for example.
Okay. I think I have to do the honest one and then the optimistic one. So I think my honest one is that the primary factor that shapes human society is trauma from the mass human extinction that the human race has been through, which is exhibited as horrific wars and starvation and numbers of people being killed to a level that we've never seen before in human history. That's what I worry about. Mm-hmm. And then my hopeful one is that we followed the trend that we've been following for the last several hundred years. So there's less death through wars, less crime, less murder, and more valuing of people as individuals. And presumably, in order for any of that stuff to even have any impact, we've also found some technology that prevents the worst effects of climate change. We've somehow moved beyond the constant escalation pattern that is current capitalism. We figured out that wasn't going to work out, probably because we kind of run out of stuff, and our population is easing down because we're no longer in that inflationary phase that we've been in for the last 200 years. So that's going to make things look pretty weird. Also, we've figured out what to do about information, and not just believing the last person you heard. That's the opposite.
Have you regulated it, or what have you done?
Oh, no. We've figured out how trust works in a world where lies are as readily available as the truth. I don't know what the answer to that is, but...
That's even a better world than now, because now you actually make a lot more money on lies than on truth.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. So we'll have figured out trust. Like we used to have mechanisms for trust that were based on authoritarian things being handed down. We'll have something else instead of that that'll be better.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. So that's cheered everyone up.
Yeah.
As if everyone wasn't depressed enough about the state of the world already. They've put on Justice Worriers, and now they've,
Well, when this
Feel much
episode is
happier.
released, maybe things are a lot better. So, we've brought things down to a realistic level now.
We'll replay this on a 100-year anniversary and find out who was right.
But it's striking that first of all, none of us said, what are you talking about in 100 years? Jesus will have come back and we will be living in the 1,000-year reign of peace, and it will be 22 years into it or something like that. And and we're all a bit hedgy about really promising futures. So there's a sign of hope in every one of us, perhaps least in mine, but we can't picture the fundamental problems really going away.
My picture is that they've diminished pretty significantly, but only through a great trial and suffering to get there.
So there is a sense of evolution of humanity that leads to somehow better humanity.
Yeah, and I think
that's
the main thing about mine. I believe the religion of progress, that is the religion of the West.
Yeah, that's why I'm a skeptic about it, because I do too much colonial stuff. That's all driven by progress. We used to colonize in the name of progress. All my sources are full of that. And I wonder how, I often wonder how exceptional this age is in where we don't have a lot of murder, and it seems to be coming back if you think about different places in the world in the West where all of a sudden things are okay again, shooting people in stores and schools, like a sort of a level of banditry in the US that just hasn't been there for 50 years. So, and then of course the other bit about murder, that where it's just forgotten, and what do we do with that part of the world? Are they not as far developed, or is it perhaps that when the economies are really bad, we just fall back onto protect my own offspring, my own genetics, and kill everybody else? I mean, we fight for toilet paper quite massively when it's going out.
I definitely believe that the moral progress is linked to prosperity. I just hope that we'll continue to have more prosperity, which I think is in conflict with climate collapse.
Yeah.
Oh, really? No, see, I think exactly the opposite. I don't think that moral progress is linked to prosperity at all. I think moral progress is linked to what's going on spiritually that we don't see, which, may kick us further down the line into our discussions than we might have wanted to start. But I really believe the mustard seed analogy that we've talked about before, that the improvements that we see in the world are a result of a slow outworking of the truths of the gospel and the good news that Jesus came to bring.
Wow. That would be amazing.
The difficulty I have, because I've thought about we've sort of touched on this debate about the progress myth before, and we've had this sort of debate where, Andy, you've said, well, I can see that there's an awful lot of progress, and I think that's a really good thing. And then Jörg's obviously steeped in all that he's studying and teaching about colonialism, and the problem, I think, with
and
the
my
progress
personal
myth.
Cynicism.
Sorry, go on.
And my personal cynicism.
Yeah, and your personal cynicism and your general glass half emptiness. But the problem with the progress myth is it attributes the progress to the wrong cause. So the progress myth says we white Western Europeans largely figured out this capitalism thing much better than anyone else, and we kick-started the Industrial Revolution, and with that came civilization and progress, and we spread that around the rest of the world, and now everybody else is slowly catching up with us, and we've done all that we can to make their parts of the world as good as we could, and it's their fault for being lazy and corrupt that they're not as good as they should be, and it attributes it all to the myth of white superiority at its root and capitalism. So that means that people like Jörg steer a mile clear of any kind of progress myth, but I don't think the actual progress bit of it is untrue. I just think what causes it is untrue, which is totally off topic really for what we're talking about now.
No, it's not. No, it's totally
it
totally
feels
on
like
topic.
A digression, but
No, it's totally on topic because we were in that place last time. When I asked Andy the question, how do you have faith in that? And how do you not resign into total cynicism and say, you know what, it's not going to change. I might as well just enjoy life for while I have it. Because it is a leap of faith to believe that this can happen. I mean, I preach about it all the time, but I feel like my faith that will actually happen is a lot smaller than yours. Like, I have a hard time picturing it because fundamentally, I believe that we are a flawed human being. That's why I have an easier time, a human race, that we have an easier time talking about this notion of sin as a collective way in which we find ourselves. And this sort of gradual redemption is harder. So I guess for me, I don't like, if we translate it to the heaven bit, I don't like some aspects of the heaven where this is this complete different world that is somewhere else, where what we do here doesn't matter. But what I do like about the image is that this is something that comes toward us, because I just cannot picture us graduating into that place.
But then Leah's saying it is coming towards us. Is that right, Leah?
Yeah, so I struggle with the
but
fact
it's not
that
coming
you
toward
believe,
us, and
you believe it's coming towards us, but you find that at the same time very hard to believe. I think
it's not coming toward us from within us. That's what I mean. Like, it's coming toward us from the outside. It's something that, like Jesus' resurrection, where you feel like there's no hope anymore, and then boom, there's a force that calls you, almost like a miraculous life force, that you discover something. And this is how I read my daily life too. Like sometimes in situations when you're down, suddenly you discover something picks you up, but it doesn't come from within you. And what you were saying earlier sounds more like humanity somehow, through the, if we Christians do a good job, or if that seed of the gospel would take hold of us, we would somehow within ourselves develop toward that kingdom.
No, I mean by the thing that is within ourselves, I mean exactly what you just described, with something spiritual rising up inside you that changes things. So it's not, it's Christ in us, and that's what the church is meant to be here for.
We right into the deep end, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. Sorry.
It's really interesting because I sometimes spend some of my time feeling uncomfortable because I feel like the Bible's leading me one way, and I'm resisting it. On this topic, I feel like, Leah, there's loads of biblical support for what you're saying, and I wish I could believe it, and I feel like I can't. I find it difficult. Not that I have a logical argument against it. It just seems,
but
it would be amazing.
I think it's because we know and we tell the wrong kind of history. So, okay, obviously people do now study social history and not just kings and queens, but we don't know all the small and tiny ways in which God is slowly percolating his kingdom through believers out into the wider world, because it's minuscule and it's it's that thing that Jörg described when he gets up one morning and then doesn't feel like despair, feels like a hope that comes to him in a slightly miraculous way that maybe makes him be kinder to his kids that day. Or
For the record, it's never in the morning.
no, it's never in the morning. Okay, we're asking too much there. But, the whole point of it is it's unseen. And I think that's what the Bible is trying to tell us. And I don't know, if you take something like the way people view women, for example, I can see the roots of the way that people now in this country, I admit it's not in every country, but in this country, people aspire to view women in a way that's very much in line with what the New Testament teaches about there is neither, slave nor free, Jew nor Greek, male nor female. That has very, very slowly, and how can you chart how it came to be an accepted way of thinking?
That's true, not just in the UK, like across the world. Many more people live in countries that recognise, for example, the equality of women in their legal system than they did 100 or 200 years ago. Vastly more. And that's just an example. There are similar examples around child labour.
I guess on the women issue, I grew up in a world where it's perfectly normal for women to work male jobs, like in construction and things like that. And then I fell into a world with the peaceful revolution where women worked traditional jobs, nursing, secretary, or stay-at-home mom was much more of a model. So I guess for me that story doesn't ring all that true, because I saw more of a regression in my life, which is now changing again. But the kind of model that we live with 2 full-time jobs is still, in a certain middle-class existence, is still very much the exception, and you feel like you're letting down your kids.
But I'm not talking about the reality that we always see day in, day out. I'm talking about people's views and aspirations, and it is that Martin Luther King thing that I think he got from someone else, which is that the arc of history is long and it bends towards justice. I really do believe that, but it's not a linear progression. It's a 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of a thing.
I was going to raise that quote as well, because any understanding of the world like this has to deal with like horrific regressions, genocides, and situations where things move backwards drastically.
And surprise, the Bible talks about it being a battle.
Yeah.
I don't find that doesn't fit.
No, I don't. I think my uneasiness comes more on like a flat reading of that. It bends toward justice seems to be the liberal cause wins in the end. And I don't mean that in the political sense, but like just like the best way will in the end prevail, or but it isn't then an abrupt coming from heaven. It's like something when we've grown up, we will do the right thing. America will always do the right thing after they exhausted every other option, like that kind of a thinking. And I'm much more comfortable with what you said earlier, in the sense that there is this power within us, or there is at least a drive toward a hope that things will get better because we have that in us, that there's that spark. But that actually is the arc of history, if it wasn't for sort of God's input, as it were.
I don't mean it's the arc of history if it wasn't for God's input, though. I believe it's the arc of history precisely because of God's input.
Yeah.
I don't think humans on their own are gradually going to evolve in that manner.
Yeah.
I'm with you there.
Because I think that's where the aspect of faith comes in, where as a Christian you actually are called to talk and think about the world differently, and I fail at that every day. But that we actually say, well, no, it's not. It doesn't come out of history. I don't believe that we will one day put in place the right democratic institutions and the proper number of judges, and then everything will come, because it will just be one side. That's why I said the thing about the liberal, the one side that wins the debate, and then some people will be unhappy, like we see in some countries now, whether justified or not. But as a Christian, you kind of look at that, you say, no, it doesn't simply come out of history. I believe there's a power that comes toward us that enables this, and that helps me to hold on even when the empire looks like it's growing rather than falling.
Yeah, and so that's definitely what I totally agree with you. That's why I struggle with the progress myth as outlined by Western liberal capitalism, because it says we are the enlightened ones and we are gradually improving and trying to bring all these other poor people along in our wake.
Which can be surprisingly neo-colonial, because then we teach, again, a number of cultures we used to colonize about what the proper ethical procedures are.
Yeah. If you just did it a bit more like us, if you were a bit more,
you're just not there yet. We're just further along on that arc.
Yeah, no, I mean that's nonsense. I don't go with that at all. And I think, sadly, that a day of reckoning is coming for that, in which
it'll produce the opposite. Actually, we see that in the gay rights debate, for example. We see that exactly that backlash makes it impossible for homosexuals in Africa to exist, because all of a sudden now it's a social issue. There's a lot more to unpack, and probably not good to do in small sound bites anyway. But I guess coming back to our topic then, where's heaven in that picture? So the arc of justice bends. The arc of history bends toward justice because God gives us input in the world. That's at least what we believe, that there's always going to be some surplus that brings life into where there's death. So can we get rid of heaven then? Because it's just sort of a progress on earth, or where are we with that?
So I'm supposed to ask you what your worries are, Jörg. Is that your first worry? You justify those that die by wearing the badge. They're the chosen whites. Those who died are justified for wearing the badge. They're the chosen whites. They justify those that died. They're the chosen whites.
Oh. I have so many worries with heaven. I don't know. We'll have to unpack them gradually.
Go on then, start for 10.
No, actually, it's not my worry, Andy, because I'm not worried that we might lose heaven. I have come to think about heaven many years ago as the thing that I'll figure out when I get there, and that if it doesn't happen, I won't be sad for obvious reasons. I guess because I won't be there, I won't exist. There will be nobody to be sad with for. And if it does, it'll be a lovely surprise or a lovely thing to happen. What I am much more worried about is that our idea of heaven produce an alienated life. Two things I want to say here. One is that our ideas of heaven are incredibly small. That's what the show The Good Place brought out so lovely. The manicured lawns and the little houses, and that if that's your idea of a reward, that you will live in this utterly boring place where you don't even have a free will because you're worshipping God all the time, like there's no rebellion possible or something. It's like this. It's a small place that you can imagine being happy in for 5 to 10 minutes, which don't know how to measure because it's eternity anyway. So that's one worry, and a lovely thing to dive into this worry is Mark Twain's story. What is it called? I'll think of it. It's a story about how he goes to heaven and he kind of discovers that there's many worlds and so on. It's really, really funny. My other worry is that we have condensed the story of Christianity to getting to heaven and renouncing the earth, at least in certain quarters. So I used to lead youth work in my church in Leipzig many, many years ago. And I don't know what prompted me to ask this question. It was totally stupid because it was disappointment I produced myself. I asked people in the room, kids, between the age of 14, 15 and early 20s, if you knew for absolute certainty that there was no heaven and no hell, it's just nothing, it's just lights out after death, who among you would still be here? Who among you would still be a Christian? And I guess I wanted to challenge them to think about it, But way too many of them found it easy not to raise their hands and say that I'd be out. Because basically what I've been told to do is not do certain things now that my friends are doing that are probably fun. And then I'll get to this much, much funner place, this theme park, this fun park. And that's what the faith is about. And that to me was... I loved doing youth work. I really, really enjoyed it. And I think we were I don't want to say successful. We were fairly good. We just kept the group together and it was a good experience. But that was the absolute low point because I asked myself, what am I doing here?
It crushed your spirit and you never recovered. Now you're the person you are today. And it's like, it's like if you're not naughty, then Santa Claus will bring you a present, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's what we made faith to be. Like, I want to excite people for a different life. Like, same way that Andy talked about it last week with this fully it's right here, turn around. You could be living in this different world. You could be living with this other hope. Now I'm suddenly sounding like that one with faith. It's a preaching mode. But like, that's what I wanted to instill into young people. But instead it felt like, wait a minute, I'm just keeping you here through your troublesome years where you figure out your hormones and your drinking, and that's what I've done. Like, oh gosh.
So Leah, is that this touches on something that you talked about in a sermon at church a while ago? Is this somewhere where your worries sit, or is it different for you?
For me, it's the fact that it's very similar, really. That we focus so much on the hereafter that we don't take much attention to what we're doing here, other than we need to make sure that we evangelize so that we bring other people along with us when we get to this mythical future land that we're all heading to. So it's very similar. Concern that it takes your mind off the making here a better place.
It's a great way to raise kids, though.
It's a good way to control people.
Yeah, it's strange that, isn't it? That something that was so popular was good at controlling the masses.
I think my worries are really similar. Like, I actually see like almost a violence to the picture of burning up this world. You know, throwing away this world, and I'm only doing time here. And actually a kind of resentment against having to put up with this life in order to be able to escape into a better life. Like, there's a profound lack of hope there, but there's also this sense of just anger with the world. And it's so the opposite of something that I aspire to, which is like a sense of contemplation and just a sense of being there. So when Jesus talks about not worrying about tomorrow and things, and there's a sense in what he's saying about being present at that specific moment and be there. And when you see Jesus speaking to people, he was like very much focused on that moment, what was happening in front of him.
Yeah, like a thankfulness for the now, right? Like a just...
Yeah, and the contrast of the way Jesus talked to people, like it was important, like right now was important.
Yeah.
Versus, we've got to put up with this. Oh, and we better tell other people that they have to put up with it, so that we can all go off to somewhere else.
Yeah. We got there when we did our pre-talk last week too. Like what is sometimes like when you raise kids, like you can't you think about what they'll be able to do a year or two from now. And then when you go back and look at the pictures, you're like, oh my gosh, this time has passed. This will never come back. I'm so blue now. Like that art of... And I was conscious of that because I had a younger sister. So I really tried to be in the now, and still you regret. Like, there's still something in the now that we tend to miss.
And I think there's something in the human condition about that. So the kind of things that you'd be thinking as a parent would be, when they're older, they might sleep later in the morning. And that's a thought that comes out of suffering, right? That you're suffering a lack of sleep at that time, and it's painful. But suffering can really distract us from...
But they're also totally cute when they wake up in the middle of the night. I mean, unless they're screaming, of course, but when they just want to talk and don't go back to sleep or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's a beauty in those moments are gone from my life, I assume.
I remember the 3 a.m. question from one of my kids, which was Mum, who made God? Like, what? You woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning to say that? Where did that come from?
Oh, lovely. Yeah.
But I think going back to your young people in your youth group, Jörg, what we find, I think, in the Old Testament, and you were talking about this previously, was that was very much people's view about heaven, that the here and now was all that there was. Yeah. And that you lived a life with hope in God's goodness, but it was a hope in God's goodness towards future generations. It wasn't a hope in some life after death.
Because heaven is a geographical place. It's not a chronological time place. It's the thing literally that's above the earth. It's in the sky. Like, you live in a world where you don't go up there, only the birds, and they're slightly closer to God, and he lives there. He is the total view.
And is that the worldview for the whole of the Bible, or just portions?
The worldview for the Old Testament, for sure. When we get to the New Testament, a lot more complicated things come in through Greek culture, through Persian culture, ideas about soul, etc. That's why the idea of resurrection is disputed in Jesus' day. In the Old Testament, you don't have resurrection. You have Sheol, you have the land of the dead, where they kind of rest in some sort of a slumber. And even the places where it does talk about, Ezekiel 37, the bones are summoned and the flesh gets put on, that's very much an allegory for the people of Israel. It's not a prophecy. And the two people who do get taken up into heaven, Enoch and Elijah, it's almost like a graduation ceremony. They're so close to how God rules that they get driven up into that geographical place that's in the now, where that controls the events of the earth, and that's sometimes and often disjointed from the earth, which is where the problem comes in. That's why you go to the temple. In the temple, heaven and earth connect. Here you kind of receive from God, you make things right with God, and there's this fundamental disconnect between heaven and earth otherwise, which is the problem of sin and salvation. But heaven is God's throne room. That's where he lives, that's where he's now, that's where he talks about Job. It's very much a geographical place, which is why I think just to say that the Isaiah 65, we'll get to that later on. It's actually talking about that. It's not talking about the kind of heaven idea that it then turns into later on.
I was only going to say Job was coming to mind when you were speaking, because Job very much seems to operate in that worldview where there's no resurrection in his mind when he's speaking.
Right. The only way to make it right is get him another wife. He doesn't lose his wife, but get him new kids.
More kids, yeah.
And all the camels back, and his welts heal. That's the only way to make it right in that world. And then to die old and satisfied. That's the good life.
And what struck me about that was that there are thousands of years of the Jewish people wrestling with matters of justice without this kind of get-out clause of it's all going to be fine after we throw away the world and get a new one.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So the teenagers of, King David's day, they'd had to be inspired by justice and hope in quite a different way than just,
Yeah. Well,
let's live well.
They'd be terrified of
much
punishments within this lifetime.
Exactly. You get boils, you get ill, you die, because that's the whole thing. That's what Job wrestles with. And other verses like the parents have eaten sour grapes and we suffer when Israel wrestles with collective sin. You get punished for what you do in this life. It's in this life. So if you're ill, if you die young, if misfortune befalls you, if you go poor, you have suffered somehow. You've done something wrong, which of course makes the whole thing of poverty tricky as well. What have you done wrong? And that's of course what Job is also about. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that wrestling definitely includes at least accepting that sometimes isn't the way the world works. And I like to see Job as being an important thing that does a lot more than that says, actually, that's not the way the world works at all.
It probably doesn't go that far because God in the end says, I'm not going to answer your question. The answer is 3 when you said, is it 1 or 2?
Yeah, God says, well, I don't know.
I don't know. No, he says,
Why
you
are you
don't
asking me?
know. He says, you don't know. Where were you?
Yeah, well, he doesn't say I don't know. It's just implied. Yeah.
Yeah. But Job is very late. That's the other thing. So Job only comes on the scene when this story gets too difficult, as it were. So you can, when you go off into exile, you get punished for the sins of your forefathers, or at least in exile latest, that story gains the majority that it was the sin of the people of Israel that brought them there.
Mm-hmm.
You get back and the story kind of continues the same way. And let's not forget the people who were brought into exile weren't the poor people. They were the upper echelons, the people who ran the country, who then complained bitterly about other people plowing their fields and doing their vineyards. So there's all that going on, which means already that punishment isn't even. So that whole idea with wrestling with punishment altogether, what does Babylon mean? What does an evil king like Cyrus mean if he allows us to come back together? And then we build this temple, we want this utopian community, and it's still not quite right. So you begin wrestling with this whole idea also collectively that you get what you deserve.
And do you think that's when the idea of some kind of resurrection of the dead really gained traction?
I'm not a biblical studies scholar, so I think there's a lot more detailed history to draw out here. Mm-hmm. But I would say that perhaps plays a role, that story runs its course because it's not built for large empires and this totally uneven power. Because by the time you get to the Seleucids, so the Persian empires, and the Ptolemies, Egyptian, kind of fighting over Palestine and the whole back and forth in the intertestamentary years, you're playing at a scale where that doesn't make any sense anymore. If you're just city-states, then yes, you win a battle, your god is bigger. But like when you get dominated by these huge empires, it gets very hard to believe how that can fall. That's one thing. But then perhaps much larger is what I said earlier, the cultural import. So Hellenization of Israel was a huge thing if you read the Maccabeans.
What's Hellenization?
So Greek ideas coming into kind of controlling the whole Mediterranean world. And one of those ideas, of course, Platonism, that behind everything you see, there's an idea. Mm-hmm. And once you have that, you have the soul. And then you have ideas of resurrection from the other side, from the Persians, of the resurrection of the dead, which is an unheard of idea. And now you kind of begin to reconcile these actually two quite incompatible ideas of an immaterial ideal state of being that is only embodied in the physical, and this idea
the real me exists in some way.
And this idea of a material resurrection of the dead in some way or some form, and those is still in tension even in our faith about heaven, you could say. So I think these two, like this old story runs its course, it doesn't fit the big empires, and then you get these other cultural imports, and that's where a lot of this comes in.
So by the time that Jesus was on the scene, you've got this tussle still going on between, are we looking at a future which is just something that the soul goes to, or are we looking at a resurrected body? But there's fairly broad consensus that there is some kind of resurrection from the dead.
Not in the Jewish community. I mean, that's what the question of the Sadducees is about.
But they were a minority, weren't they? Or were they...
The Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection, and they were the ones who had it good in life, so...
Yeah, they didn't need to.
So when I say I probably don't need heaven, maybe that's, I don't know, I don't have it that good in life, but probably good enough to be happy with how things are, I suppose. No, what the Sadducees are doing is, when they ask Jesus about, we have the story, this woman was married to 7 men, and when they get to heaven, who's she going to marry? They're not just making fun of the physical idea of heaven, but they're making fun of the whole idea of resurrection altogether. Or when you have Paul preaching in the Greek, and he kind of brings this idea of this Persian idea of the resurrection of the dead into Athens. They kind of, when they hear about the resurrection, it says they kind of walk away. They think this is too crazy. So that was still very much a disputed idea. I don't know, maybe we have to talk about this in our next episode a bit more in detail. But the story of heaven and what that means for justice changes fundamentally, because, like you said earlier, Andy, there's no cop-out card.
Yeah, and that's where we should be talking this episode, just like you said, because next episode we're going to talk more about resurrection. This episode we want to talk about this idea of heaven and how it relates to justice specifically. So, Leah, do you have thoughts about that? I feel like I said before, the sermon that you preached about the climate definitely had some things to say about this.
Yeah, I mean, what I got to when I was preparing that talk was that we get very sidelined with this idea of there being a wholesale destruction of the world that as we know it now, and then some wholesale new thing arriving. And actually, if we look at the biblical texts that seem to support that, then actually a lot of it is a misreading. So it's particularly in 1 Peter, I think, where it talks about a new heaven and a new earth. The words that are used in the Greek are much more like a renewal. I think the example that I found that stuck in my slow brain was it's more about getting a new kitchen than getting a new car. So in order to get a new kitchen, I'm not going to totally bulldoze the old one. I'm just going to, buy some new units and a new cooker. If I get a new car, it could be something fundamentally, totally and utterly different to what I had before. So we have in the Bible definitely this sense of a renewed heaven and a renewed earth to look forward to. And I think the discussion we were having earlier on was a little bit about whether that's a gradual thing or a sudden thing, but that it isn't a total discontinuity, however much there might be some sudden happening. It's not a sudden happening where everything that is currently existing is suddenly burnt up and destroyed and counts for nothing.
And now you do what they tell you. And now you do what they told you.
The thing that strikes me even in the Isaiah 65 passage is that, it says, like heaven and earth are no more, they're not even thought about anymore, there's a new heaven and a new earth. But the whole thing suspiciously looks like the old thing. There's a Jerusalem, there's the holy mountain. So it's almost like another story of the flood. It's like God is trying to start it over again, the same story. Like he's trying to get his story right with humanity this time. It's like the same old dysfunctional, let's try one more time. And actually we love these verses because we think they point to heaven, but really it's about Israel and it's framed in verses of judgment that those people who are doing well now will not be part of it, or who not. It's like judging all the evildoers who don't really sacrifice properly.
Just remind us of the nice bits, Jörg, and then you can tear it down.
Oh, right. You want to go that way about it. Okay.
Yeah.
So Isaiah 65, verse 17. Behold, I will create new heavens and a new earth. The former things will not be remembered, nor will they come to mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in what I will create. For I will create Jerusalem to be a delight, and its people a joy. Like this time around. The New Yorkers are going to be nice. I will rejoice over Jerusalem and take delight in my people, unlike before. The sound of weeping and crying will be heard in it no more. Never again will be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his years. He who does not live out his years, right? We take this to be heaven. The old man dies, but he dies at a good age. This is Old Testament thinking. He who dies at 100 will thought a mere youth. He who fails to reach 100 will be considered accursed. They will build houses and dwell in them. They will plant vineyards and eat their fruit. No longer will they build houses and others live in them, or plant and others eat. For as the days of a tree, so will be the days of my people. My chosen ones will long enjoy the work of their hands. They will not toil in vain or bear children doomed to misfortune, for they will be a people blessed by the Lord, they and their descendants with them. Before they call, I will answer. While they are still speaking, I will hear. And then we get into this really eschatological, and often it's in pictures of heaven. The wolf and the lamb will feed together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. But dust will be the serpent's food, no longer the woman's heel or the man's heel. They will neither harm nor destroy on my holy mountain, says the Lord. When you read this in the mindset of Israel, it just means, okay, we're sitting in exile now. But just like we got out of Egypt, just like we threw off the yoke of the Philistines, this time it'll be better. Kind of like Leah's hope in a way. You know, there will be a surplus in humanity, and it will start to feel better, and there will be that place where life will no longer be lived on the backs of other life.
But we can't dismiss that just as a vision of hope for the Israelite nation at that time, because it is then repeated fairly similarly in Revelation, isn't it, as well?
Only the verses about heaven and new earth, and then the imagery really changes. And I think that's where the New Testament brings in these new ideas, and where this becomes... So I think the lion and the lamb already makes this a slightly otherworldly place. Because, you know, no matter how much humans sin, you can understand that slavery isn't a good thing. You should live in your own house that you've built and all of this. But lion and the lamb not eating. So that already gives it that slightly unreal spin, which I think takes off later.
I think this fits. Yeah, I was noticing while you were reading that it fits in with justice in a different way from the way we might think about it, because it fits with this narrative of the evil empire, which is unjust, will be torn down and be replaced by a better world. And that's the same narrative with, like, the flood, everything, like the evil empire is torn down and something better comes in, and the other patterns of the day of the Lord, which again is repeated in that Revelation thing, even though it's different as well. And
that's the pattern of Isaiah, like post-judgment. So it kind of says, okay, you are now in this place because you deserved it. But this is actually the time when I will winnow, you know, the wheat from the thresh. For that, or the imagery just a few verses before is it's clipping the vine. You kind of cut off the dead branches. But with the good green shoots, I will plant this better vineyard. So again, it's very much this kind of place. Because remember, heaven is a geographical place. The question is, how does this kingdom in heaven actually get installed on earth? Like, when does it get better? How does it get better? Because right now in heaven, it's already good because that's where God lives.
So I think we've covered quite nicely what the hope would have been in sort of people's minds pre-Jesus, that this idea of a better world that was fairly much like this world put right. And it would have been for future generations, even if it wasn't for you. Even if you were the generation stuck in exile, you would look forward to a future generation that was doing better. I think what I'm not still so clear about is what we're saying that the New Testament promises as a future.
Well, one thing I think,
future hope.
Coming off one thing that you said in our pre-talk, is actually that this is incredibly collective, this Old Testament idea as well. And I think that's important. Whereas in the New Testament, the collective changes slightly into the church. That's one thing that happens. So it's no longer a national, it's elective, as it were. Those who believe in Jesus.
Yeah, it was definitely something that struck me when I was thinking about this, that for people today, in the way, particularly in this country, we live very much as our own individuals, seeking our own self-realization and actualization and all the rest of it. Yeah. It's hard to imagine, just like your group of young people, really, it's hard for us to say, well, you know, it doesn't really matter that I'm not going to go to a better place or a good place, because that's fine. It will be good for the future generations, and I feel so much part of the collective of my people and my people who live now and my people who are to come, that I'm happy with that, and that's enough hope for me to feel that my children's children's children might live in this kind of Isaiah 66 kind of 65 kind of way. That's not really a mindset that we identify with very well now, is it?
That's so important, though. Like, if you just think, listen to you, like, put yourself in the shoes of somebody who genuinely doesn't believe that there is life after death. And I know, like, in our society, many people don't believe this, but then maybe we do, like, kind of some sort of idea of reincarnation. Like, we just can't, like, this idea that as an individual you cease to exist. If this is how you are brought up collectively in what you believe, you must invest so much more in your children, in your memory, in your... Well, not just so much in your memory, because that doesn't matter in the end, but actually in the kind of world you want to build.
Maybe. Or maybe it's like Ecclesiastes and
you
basically given up hope on your children and you despair.
There we go again. I guess so, yeah. It's a glass full, half empty, full, half empty kind of thing.
So on the New Testament thing, we've got to talk surely about what Jesus meant when he kept going on about the kingdom of heaven being here.
Yeah.
And like we surely have to understand that as him talking about... Do we have to understand that as him talking about that same stuff that was being talked about in Isaiah, like something being torn down and built up, but then he was saying that's already here, or what? Or was it just something else? Or
yeah.
What was he talking about?
Oh man, what verse do we want to take for that one? I mean, one thing we've talked about before, and I think I've preached on it not too long ago, is this "My Father's house has many mansions" kind of thing, and was it John 14? Where Jesus says that he goes away, he comforts his disciples, and he says, "In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I'm going there to prepare a place for you, and if I could go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, so that you may be where I am. You know the place where I'm going." And then they say, "We don't know where you're going. Can you show us the way?" And he answers cryptically, "I am the way." What do you mean? And of course, the first thing to note is "my Father's house." Like that whole imagery is usually taken for like mansions, and there's songs to sing about it, and this whole good place imagery is rooted right here. But "my Father's house," when Jesus uses the phrase elsewhere, just denotes the temple. So he kind of says, I'm going into that immediate reign of God. So if you just think about it geographically, and in the temple there were many rooms as well for people who were doing the service there, who were... it's a great Bible Project episode on this whole thing.
So when he's saying that he's going into the temple, are you referring to the thing that they talk about in that Bible Project series about how the temple is like a connection between heaven and earth?
Yes, so he's saying the same thing that you know from the temple. That's how I also understood what they were saying in the Bible Project. The same way, the temple has many places where you can be near when you're doing service, the same way it is with where God reigns. And I will show you that way. There is a way of partaking in God's kingdom that is just the same way as being near to the Holy of Holies in the temple.
And that fits really well with a lot of what you hear in the Psalms about it. David particularly longing to be in the Lord's house, and better is one day in your house. He may have not believed that anything happened after he died, but he definitely expressed that longing to be in God's house, and for that to be kind of where he ended up. So same kind of idea.
So now the question is, when he says, "I go to prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you with me, that you may be where I am," is he talking about his death and resurrection only? So I'm going to be gone for 3 days, and when I come back, I will take you into a new way of living, into a new way of being. There will be an amazing kind of being close to God that you have no idea is possible right now. Or is he saying, at the end of time, I will take you to your manicured garden in an outer worldly place? Of course, I'm stacking the cards here, but like in my favor. But like that's the kind of question you have to ask yourself. And depending on what picture you have of heaven and what it means to talk about the kingdom of heaven, this verse means something totally different. It's Jesus going away. Is he talking about, this is before he dies, is he talking about his ascension? I'm going away and I'll come back thousands of years later to bring you with me? Or is he saying, I'm going to go away for 3 days, prepare a way for you, and then I will take you to that place of the presence of the Father that you have no idea is there. But we don't know how to get there. I am the way. Wait and see.
And it's such a fork in the road, the two things that you've just outlined, isn't it? Because once you've taken a particular path in that fork, then there are loads of verses, particularly in the Gospels and also in the epistles, that mean something totally different to you just because of which standpoint you've come from. So if you think about the talk about depositing things in heaven, laying up treasure in heaven, about the Holy Spirit being a sort of a taste of what's waiting for you, about our citizenship being in heaven, all those things you can view as we will eventually experience those things when we die, because we will then catch up with where all that stuff is stored. Or you can see it as you said before, as heaven coming towards us at some point, and us experiencing ever more of it in our present life and in our future life.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're like opposites.
They are, but they say the
Jesus
same thing. The same thing, but they're opposites.
Jesus saying, like, the kingdom of heaven is here.
Yeah.
Repent, realize, and change everything because it's already here, which is what Andy was saying.
Yeah, I really love that. He's like, it's behind you. Like, turn around. It's like, just look around. It's right behind you. It's there.
That fits with this idea of, take hold of, be here, be in the present, like we were saying. Like I was saying, take hold of the thing that's here because it's now. It's like the opposite of put up with this rubbish, throw it away, and then we start living.
Some of those that work forces.
And actually, the born again metaphor is really helpful for this if you also start to think of that in the same way as well, because we've taken this born again business that Jesus talks about with Nicodemus in John. He says, you must be born again, you must be born from heaven. And we've turned it into sort of like some experience that some Pentecostal Christians experience and other people don't. And then being humans, we have a whole great big argument about whether you get into heaven if you're not born again, and yada-yada-yada. But actually, it's another way of trying to express that we need to change our state and our state of being even while we're here. So we are born again. We are not of this world, but we are here. But we are here. That's the bit that we kind of forget.
I looked up a few verses. I just kind of used like one of those Bible things on the internet. It says like heaven. Tell me what you have in heaven. And here's one verse they gave me. 1 Corinthians 2:9. However, as it is written, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him. But God has revealed it to us by his Spirit. It's like, how on earth is that the computer in the sky at the end of the age? Especially if you read the verses before it, where it says, we do, this is verse 6, however speak a message of wisdom among the mature, but not the wisdom of this age, or of the rulers of this age, who are coming to nothing. No, we speak, man, think about the rules of this age, like all the stuff that's going on right now. Gosh. Anyway, I don't want to mention his name.
Coming to nothing.
No, coming to nothing.
Yay.
Coming to nothing. 80% of evangelicals coming to nothing with the wisdom of the rules of this age.
Have we got through nearly a whole episode without the
I
T
didn't
word?
say the name.
You
I didn't say the
Well
name. But he says, no, we speak of God's secret wisdom, a wisdom that has been hidden and that God has destined for our glory before time began. None of the rulers of this age understood it, for if they had, they would not have crucified the God of glory. They would have understood Jesus' message. My gosh, how can this be about heaven as the end of thing that you go to in some sort of disembodied state? This is about the secret to discover through Jesus' death now.
Yeah. I've been wondering about whether the film The Matrix is a helpful or unhelpful analogy.
Me
because
too.
There's this sense of waking up. Like in The Matrix, I'm going to spoil The Matrix for you, listener, I'm sorry.
You've seen it
It's one
by
of my
now,
favourite
surely.
films, but it was a long time.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen it, you're too young to listen to this episode.
Well, if you haven't seen it, then you should pause, go and watch it, and then come
Right.
back. So there's this idea of waking up, which I think really resonates with what she's just saying. Like, it's behind you. Turn around, wake up, see the truth of the situation. And when you've woken up, everything is still the same, and everything looks totally different.
Mm-hmm.
But then in the Matrix, you then go to another place, so maybe that kind of ruins it.
Well, and then in the Matrix, you find a very dystopian place where it's almost going back into the Matrix, like the guy who went back in.
You see,
Yeah.
I'm like just on a different level to you two. So the Truman Show for me is much better at this.
Okay.
Oh, that's
So
great.
the Truman Show, it's he stands on the threshold of
Yeah.
stepping out of that world that he knows, and he has this real God encounter, doesn't he, with the producer, who says, "Well, look, you can step out into this big scary world, but you won't be cosseted and bounded around in the same way that you are currently." And so, but he can step out into something very different, but he'll still be with humans and in a world. It's the same people who've been acting will still be around. It's
And some of the certainties that he had before actually go away.
will be gone.
Yeah, very good. I like that.
You see, it's not
I
all
still like
to
the
be
Matrix,
found in
but I love the
sci-fi.
Truman Show, but I still like the Matrix slightly better.
Yeah, I knew you would.
Not because of the guns. It's not me. I didn't like that bit. But
Yeah, it's just the black robes. That's all it is.
no,
The
I
cloaks
don't
are
have the frame for that.
Anyway, how did we get here?
Yeah, waking up and seeing the world.
Yeah,
Now-
being born again.
The same
being-
world, seeing
yeah,
it totally different.
Yeah.
because you're born from somewhere different.
Now, I mean, in all fairness, there is a lot of text in the New Testament and even in Jesus' talk and parables, especially when it comes to some sort of judgment and being too late, that that leans more on the other side of that story. Like I would say with John 14, I'm certain. With 1 Corinthians 2, I'm certain that heaven is not the interpretation that's correct here. When we get to Matthew 25, we have 3 parables there about being ready for the kingdom.
So can we just go over before you
Yeah.
do Matthew 25? Can you just remind us what the 2 others you said were? Because I'm aware that I've.
So John
already
14 is the my Father's house has many mansions, and here I feel fairly confident that it is Jesus talking about his death and opening up a different way to the temple, a kind of way of God's presence that is as easy to get to as going into a temple room. And 1 Corinthians 2, I mean, it's obvious in the reading that it's about a different way of being in the world, the one we just read.
Okay.
What God has prepared for us is that outside of the Truman Show. It's not, it's just a different way of understanding what's really going on, where the producers suddenly don't matter anymore.
It's the one that inspired the waking up thing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So now tell us what Matthew 25 is.
So Matthew 25 has all these stories about parables of being ready, and being watchful. So we have the parable of the 10 virgins who are greeting the bridegroom, young girls celebrating the wedding, and some don't bring enough oil, and so they miss the arrival of the bridegroom, and others are ready.
And all of these kind of feed into this narrative of we need this place we're in now is just a making sure we're ready for the next place. Kind
And
of.
there's a time like Jesus will come back, and that's where a real break happens to the story that you're in now. Like now it's boring, you're waiting by the side of the road, nothing's happening, and then the feast will start. Then you have the story of the talents. It's always is about the kingdom of heaven, right? It's the kingdom of heaven will be. The story of the talents, people given talents in different measures, which is a bit of money, and some invest it and another person just hides it. And then there's judgment. And then there's and that is perhaps the clearest one on the sort of judgment bit, the sheep and the goats. And then at the end, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, it says in Matthew 25:31, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his throne in heavenly glory. all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. And then he'll say to the one side, to the sheep, come and you are blessed, blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, gave something to drink. And then they say, when did we do that? Well, you fed the hungry. You visited the person in prison and so on. And then the same thing with the goats, only with opposites. They get expelled to the place where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Or what is it here? Eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life.
So what's interesting to me about this is that it totally goes against our narrative, and it makes it sound like there's like a stop to the world and then another one starts. Mm-hmm. But it's also totally on topic for justice. Mm-hmm. Like the reason why Jesus is telling this story is I think, is not to do theology, although we have to deal with the theology involved in it. But it's to say, look what you should be doing.
Yeah. I almost wonder if it's even... I want to push that even further and say, because it is about the now, the question is, what kingdom are you a part of? So when it says, come you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world, you've earned this. This is that, you were part of that kingdom story from the beginning. You made it happen. Right. Well, it was prepared for you, but you've inherited it.
So that's interesting, because that makes me think, I had such an objection to the citizens of heaven phrase. Mm. That if being a citizen of heaven means behaving well towards people who are in prison, mm-hmm. I can kind of get behind that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a citizenship test, I guess. It's you don't have to know the Queen or anybody for that.
Yeah, well, I was objecting to Citizens of Heaven because it's the same narrative of, I don't really even live here. Mm. I belong somewhere else, and I'm throwing this place away.
Yeah, and it's all of these are about a certain investment in the now. So the 10 virgins, they need to invest oil into this waiting time. Keep the lamp burning as a sign toward the feast, right? We're waiting for somebody. What are you doing on the side of the road? We're not just sleeping. We're preparing for a feast. Mm. There's something to keep running here.
And the talents. We're not burying the talent.
Exactly.
We're doing something in the way that we live now, because we know that it's part of what comes next.
Yeah. So all of these are not about saying the sinner's prayer, but they're about in as discontinuous as they are, perhaps less so the 10 virgins and the judgment of the people with the talents, but certainly then Jesus coming from the clouds with the angels. But all of them, even with that discontinuity, are about a fundamental continuity, because what you do now is investment into the kingdom.
Right, yeah, they're actually about not sitting waiting to go somewhere else, but being how you are now in this time.
Yeah, because when you go feed the hungry, when you are with the person in prison, you're encountering Jesus like he will in that time. So it's already living out that kingdom hope, as it were. I mean, that's the gist of the message, right? It's mm-hmm. Again, like you said, it's the opposite of the sitting by. It's what you want, the kingdom of heaven. Keep that light on. Invest your time and energy. Go visit the hungry. If you want the kingdom, that's what you do. And it's not just some sort of metaphysical switch or trick by saying the prayer and then you get to this other place.
And there's a continuity in the talents as well, because there were 3 people, weren't there, given an amount of money, and 2 of them used it wisely and were then given further responsibilities in this future world. So there's a continuity between your actions in this world, how you use the things that you've been given, continuous with what kind of responsibilities you're then prepared for in some
Mm-hmm.
in some way.
And suddenly we're not so far off from my father's house has many mansions. I will make this sort of new way of the kingdom of heaven available to you now. Because suddenly you realize, actually, wait a minute, going to the poor, that's already being part of what's to come.
Mm-hmm.
It's already greeting Jesus. Investing those talents is already part of what that will gain.
Mm-hmm. And that it fits for me something else, which is that whenever Jesus talks about punishment and burning and things like that, it seems to me that what he's talking about is the urgency of acting now. So the sheep and the goats fits with that. That the kind of dire warnings of punishment are intended to make you wake up and act now.
Yeah, yeah. So perhaps it's more Old Testament than New in some ways, because it still has that thing, how you act today, that will have an impact on what you will receive. And there's a continuity. It's not a completely different world that's coming down that only has to do with one prayer you said at one point in your life.
Yeah, and especially if you think that means that you then sit and wait.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. That's the important bit. That it's not, normally that prayer is important, but you want that to be a start of that investment in, almost like that prayer enables you that access to the temple we talked about earlier, that kingdom of heaven vision that then unlocks all these other stuff, that suddenly you understand that actually taking care of people is already a vision, is already being part of this kingdom.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like I was taught a story which was like the sheep and the goats, except the thing that Jesus said was, why didn't you tell other people about the sheep and the goats?
Right. When you go to prison, you should actually tell them about Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah, you shouldn't care about whether they're mistreated. You should just tell them about the secret of how to get out of this horrible place into the good place.
And interestingly, talking about prosperity and what might happen to the world, this passage in Matthew comes just after all sorts of horrible, dire warnings about what's going to happen to Jerusalem and what was actually, we know now, historically, kind of AD 70-ish, when there was just hideous retribution by the Romans for a Jewish uprising. So that's, we talked right at the beginning about our fears for the future, and that's the context that Jesus is speaking into, a coming pretty much apocalypse for the Jewish people living in Jerusalem. He's just warned about that.
Well, and
go on.
Yeah, even more so when Matthew's was written down, it had already happened.
Oh, true.
From what we think. So, Matthew's kind of, depending how you want to date it, but between 80 and 110 AD-ish or something in that vicinity. Okay. So as a reader, that's what you would hear.
Yeah. You know this has already happened.
Yeah.
And yet you're...
Wow, our dire predictions about the future at the beginning of this episode suddenly seem highly relevant to the conversation.
Yeah. Again, it comes back to this faith thing, huh?
I also think that kind of visceral hope in heaven as being rescued from the evil empire is like the common experience of a lot of oppressed people, and we can miss out on a lot of the meaning of it if we're not oppressed, if we're privileged and comfortable.
Yeah. Wow. All right. That was a long arc. I don't know if it bends toward justice, but...
Did it bend back towards dismalness again?
Bends toward dismalness. That would be on brand, wouldn't it?
It would.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots more to unpack, and I think we have to talk through this more. But I think that the whole thing about continuity, discontinuity, we certainly have it wrong if we think the kingdom of heaven is what happens at the end of time. I think that's wrong. It's also wrong to think it just happens in the immediate and gradually, and like as if God is the same as the world as it is now.
Mm.
So we have to wrestle with this continuity thing, and that's an old hat, and we know that. But it really goes into the verses themselves and how you read and interpret them. Makes a huge difference.
I really love the picture that Andy gave us of this amazing river flowing past you, and then you managed to fish a couple of nuggets of heaven into the world as a glimpse of this thing that is real and does exist, but isn't quite here as well.
Yeah. Except until you had empathy with the fish, so you know.
Apart from I don't want to talk about fishing fish out. Can we talk about fishing out beautiful bits of river?
Cold water.
Splashing yourself, yeah. But yeah, that river exists now, right? But we can't swim in it now.
Mm-hmm.
But we can still kind of experience. It feels faithful to what Jesus was saying about this thing is here now. But then so much of what we see in the world doesn't reflect that thing. But then the urgency of Jesus of saying, it really matters that you are reflecting, that you are fishing.
And the wise and foolish virgins becomes, are you sitting on your hands next to the river, or are you fishing in it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Are you waiting for the time where you just forget the land and jump in the river? And those stories seem like just direct contradictions against that way of living. Cool. So that's heaven
in a nutshell.
So we were aware when we started preparing this episode that we've got more things to talk about, including resurrection, and also like who gets saved and that whole conversation. So we've deliberately left that stuff out of this episode. So listener, I don't know exactly what order things will happen in, but those are topics that are coming because we know that they're part of this conversation. So anything else to add, Leah?
No, I think that's it from me tonight.
Anything to add, Jörg?
No, I think I'm good. I think next time we should recap the justice aspect of this again, and then see what justice has to do with resurrection. I think that'll be the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I want to find some story that nobody's ever written about how these things are just gradually getting better. Just nobody sees it because it's so under the surface. I feel like there's like some book in some dusty old bookshop somewhere that talks about all the ways in which this has happened in history that we just don't see and know.
Yeah, send it to me when you find it.
I will. Yeah.
I'll put an asterisk on it somehow.
No, and you won't. You'll tear it apart and tell me it's historically inaccurate or something, and then that'll be the end of that.
No, I'm totally with you. I'm totally with you. It's my hope is that that's happening, and this is what I'm looking forward to. But it's a real effort for me to keep my mind in that spirit, because I often feel that we're seeing decline. Maybe it's when you work in education that happens or something.
Yeah, I work with nice people who are trying to install air source heat pumps.
Solar panels, so
paying a lot of money for them.
Future.
Yeah.
Okay, so listener, heaven is here, and we need to wake up and see it. And there's a load more we need to talk about. And what strikes me again and again is how highly related this conversation is with justice, even though it sounds completely theoretical. What we believe about this completely changes the way that we behave, like we were seeing, even with the last stories we were looking at. So there's more coming on this. But in the meantime, we hope you're safe, and we'll see you next time. been listening to Justice Warriors. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you can also follow us on social media by searching for Justice Warriors, where warrior is spelt like someone who worries about things. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a rating, since that helps other people find us. Also, please tell your friends about us in real life. We'd love to hear from you. To get in touch, use the email address in the show notes or contact us via the social media links. Thanks for listening.
You do what they told